What's up, guys? Recently, I dropped another Real Talk podcast where we talked about the second trailer for the upcoming 9th entry in the Saw franchise entitled Spiral from the Book of Saw. For anyone who didn't see it or didn't even listen to the whole thing, totally understandable. It's over an hour long. But in order to set up this video, I did want to draw your attention to this approximately 4.5 minute segment of that discussion before we talk about where the inspiration for this movie came from. I have been wondering for a year now, and I know it wasn't intentional, other than this just being from the mind of Chris Rock. And Chris Rock, if you have seen his stand-up or some of his other films and stuff, he gets really ingrained in this concept of the Black experience in America. And it feels like this movie, if it had come out in October of last year and somehow it was able to come out in theaters with the reality of last year, seems kind of tailor-made for the moment.
Right.
If that makes sense to y'all, and for anybody listening, the new Billy is a pig cop.
Right. Yes.
It's like, oh my gosh, this is like it feels weird to say. It's like, it kind of feels like it's this movie, Chris Rock and everything, however it turns out, had some kind of the pulse in the Black Lives Matter movement before it blew up last summer. And not to say that it came out of nowhere last summer. This has been something that's brewing for, about half a decade now. So
yeah. So
definitely, and it's weird to me, and I'm wondering if that's going to play into the movie's theme and success. And I'm also wondering that because this really wouldn't be the first time the Saw movies have played into the cultural zeitgeist of the time to varying degrees of success. I think it's pretty hard to separate the boom of the franchise itself in the post 9/11 era, where you had the concept of Guantanamo Bay, torture going on, kind of a cultural catharsis at the reality that we were living in our day-to-day lives and trying to ignore, and how that played. And I feel like those two things, without going in too far to it, because one, I'm not researching it, and this is just a discussion for people to have in the comment section below, but those two things absolutely played off of each other. And then we also had the healthcare debate going on in 2009 that Saw 6 still feels even more to this day more relevant than it otherwise would have been in any other context. So it's interesting to me that, for what it's worth, and despite all the hate that it gets, the Saw franchise definitely goes above and beyond being culturally relevant, even in its 9th entry. So that's all I was thinking about when it comes to the new Billy puppet and all this stuff. It just seems kind of tailor-made for the moment, and that's, I'm sure, intentional and kind of a happy accident in terms of the reality of the last year.
I think that's pretty spot on, And as a joke, I'm going to say Elizabeth Warren is my guess for the new Jigsaw. Woman, pro universal healthcare, pro BLM. I think it all checks out.
Yeah, that's a fair guess.
Could be anybody. But
just to touch on really quick the fact that the new puppet, I'm going to call him Willie.
That's a good name.
That's a great name.
Right? He's not only a pig, which again, it goes with just the happy accident. Like, pigs were a part of the series before anybody thought to make the connection to cops.
Well, cops have been called pigs for decades.
Exactly. And then the fact that it's a marionette now, it doesn't seem to be like a little ventriloquist. It's like every time you see it, it's either it was in the box when Chris Rock opened it, or it was strung up like a marionette when Samuel L. was walking up on it, which coincidentally is the same kind of it looks like the kind of trap that Samuel L.'s in himself, like he's a man-made marionette.
Oh, that's actually good. Yeah,
so I thought that might
be something.
I hadn't even thought about that. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say on top of that other than good catch. Now, taking all of this into context, one, It was an off-the-cuff discussion on a podcast. I hadn't really researched any of that stuff before, nor have I really looked into it since. I just wanted to share my perspective. Plus, it's also important to just point out that because of my race and my general life experiences, I am not the person most qualified to talk to any of those points to the most educated degree because I just simply haven't lived them. With all that being said, and going back to the point that I made within that segment, I do think it is really interesting that this happens to be the next movie in the Saw franchise. It kind of does prove my point that the Saw franchise has the ability more than any other iconic horror movie franchise to put its fingers on the pulse of the social consciousness and make a story that revolves around that issue. As previously stated, despite its lackluster performance in the box office back in 2009, the healthcare aspect of Saw 6 wasn't only resonant then based off of everything going on in our day-to-day lives, but is more so now, especially after a global pandemic. And while a lot of people might brush this off as I'm simply reaching too far, I think it's impossible to disconnect the box office success of the early Saw films with people in America trying to come to terms with the brutal reality of Guantanamo Bay and what our country is willing to do in order to get to the truth. Or maybe some construct of the truth that it really wants. And with all that being said, I do think it's incredibly interesting that this movie, or at least a little bit of what we heard about it, wasn't initially conceived to be the 9th entry in the Saw film franchise. Now, they have said that Chris Rock is a major fan of the franchise, and while I do believe that he did eventually want to do something within this universe, one thing that kind of keeps circulating is he didn't come in with this idea being the 9th entry of the franchise. He came in with the idea of a horror movie, and like the original script for Saw 2, it was taken and reworked into the mythology of the Saw universe. And going off that, based off of everything that we've seen from the movie thus far, everything that we know about it, and just the fact that we're going to be focusing on very pointed topics for this narrative, I think it's totally possible that Chris Rock had a horror movie concept that was based off of the Black experience and the idea of probably not only being Black in America, but being a Black cop in America. And not just that either, but being a Black legacy of a cop family in America, given everything that's been going on for the last half decade to a decade now of police brutality, the way this stuff is filmed for people to see online, and just in general the backlash that we've seen through the last couple of years. And as I said before, I cannot be the person to talk about this in depth because I just simply haven't lived that reality. But if that's true, then I have to say that I am more excited for this film than I otherwise would have been, because the Saw franchise is at its peak in quality and enjoyability and literally in every other aspect that you want from a cinematic experience when it is being brutally honest about the world that you and I live in. The producers say all the time that one of the best things about the franchise is that it forces you to look at your own vices and think whether or not you'd be able to conquer a test that Jigsaw puts you in. And while that is appealing on an individual level, I think the series as a whole has dug its heels into the sand, and every time it makes a grand statement, it's when it talks about the way that we live our lives as a society more than just as an individual. And if everything that we've seen about this movie is to be believed, that seems to be the direction that they're going in. So count me excited, guys. Anyway, like I said multiple times in this video, I'm not the person to really talk about this in any real way. I really want to hear people's thoughts and opinions about this in the comment section below. Please just try to keep it civil. I usually don't have to say that when it comes to this fan base because just horror movie fans in general are just some of the nicest people. Very accepting, very honest, very gracious with everything that they put to the table. So guys, I hope that we'll have this conversation because I really would like to hear other perspectives on it. And I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. It's been real.